David Martinez loved being a small-town pharmacist. After graduating from pharmacy school in Portland, he could have stayed in the city with higher pay and more prestige. But he'd chosen to return to Millbrook, Oregon, population 8,400, where he'd grown up. He liked knowing his customers by name, remembering their medications and conditions, being part of a community where people looked out for each other. Millbrook Pharmacy sat on Main Street between the hardware store and the diner. David had worked there for 12 years, eventually buying the place from the retiring owner. He employed 2 pharmacy technicians and served most of the town's residents plus people from surrounding rural areas. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November when everything changed. The pharmacy was quiet, the post-lunch lull before the after-work rush. David was reviewing inventory when the door chimed. A teenage girl walked in. David noticed her immediately because something seemed off. She was maybe 16, Hispanic, painfully thin. Her clothes were wrong for the cold November weather. A short skirt, thin tank top, cheap high heels that she walked in awkwardly like she wasn't used to wearing them. No jacket, despite the 40-degree temperature outside. Her hair was messy, makeup smeared. She looked exhausted. But what struck David most were her eyes. Empty, haunted, the look of someone who'd given up hope. She approached the counter without making eye contact, slid a prescription across to David, and stood silently waiting. David picked up the prescription. It was for oxycodone, 60 tablets of 30 milligrams, a significant quantity of powerful opioid painkillers. The prescription was supposedly from Dr. Robert Chen, signed 2 days ago. David frowned. He knew most doctors in the area. He'd never heard of Dr. Robert Chen. The prescription itself looked legitimate, proper format, DEA number included. But something felt wrong. He looked at the girl more carefully. She was staring at the floor, wouldn't meet his eyes. Her hands were shaking. She had bruises on her arms, barely covered by the thin top, track marks suggesting injection drug use. She looked malnourished and sleep-deprived. "Miss, is this prescription for you?" David asked gently. "No, for someone else. He sent me to pick it up." Her voice was flat, defeated. No emotion. "Who prescribed this?" "The doctor on the paper." Still not making eye contact. David's training kicked in. Pharmacists were taught to watch for red flags, suggesting prescription fraud or drug diversion. Patients paying cash for narcotics, prescriptions from unfamiliar doctors, people picking up medications for others, nervous or evasive behavior. This prescription had multiple red flags. "I need to verify this prescription with Dr. Chen before I can fill it. Can you give me a phone number for him?" For the first time, the girl looked up. Her eyes met David's, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Terror, desperation, and something else. A silent plea for help. "I don't have a number. He just gave me the prescription. I need to get the pills and go back. Please, I need them now." Her voice cracked slightly, the flat effect breaking. "Back where?" "The motel. I need to go back to the motel. Please just give me the pills." David made a decision. "I'm sorry, but I can't fill this prescription without verifying it. It's pharmacy policy. Why don't you have a seat while I make some calls?" The girl's face filled with panic. "No, I can't wait. He'll be mad. I need the pills now. Please." "Who will be mad?" She caught herself. "Nobody. Please, can you fill it or not?" "Not until I verify it. I'm sorry." The girl looked like she might cry. Then she turned and walked quickly out of the pharmacy, those awkward high heels clicking on the tile floor. David watched her go, then immediately picked up the phone. He called the DEA number listed on the prescription. It was registered to a Dr. Robert Chen in Sacramento, California, 4 hours away. David called the number listed for Dr. Chen's practice. "Dr. Chen's office. How may I help you?" "Hi, this is David Martinez, pharmacist at Millbrook Pharmacy in Oregon. I have a prescription here supposedly from Dr. Chen for a patient, and I need to verify it." "I'm sorry, but Dr. Chen only practices in California. He wouldn't write prescriptions for patients in Oregon." "Can you describe what Dr. Chen's prescriptions typically look like?" The receptionist described prescription pads that didn't match what David was holding. "Also, Dr. Chen retired 3 months ago. He's not writing any new prescriptions." David's suspicions were confirmed. The prescription was fraudulent. Someone had stolen or forged Dr. Chen's information to write fake prescriptions. But David's concern went beyond prescription fraud. That girl, her appearance, her behavior, her terror, suggested something much worse than someone trying to illegally obtain painkillers. The bruises, the inappropriate clothing, the exhaustion, the track marks, the desperation mixed with fear, her mention of a motel and someone who would be mad. David had read articles about human trafficking. He'd attended a continuing education seminar about pharmacists' role in identifying trafficking victims. Traffickers often sent victims to pharmacies to obtain drugs, either to keep the victims sedated and compliant, or to sell for profit. The signs matched. David called the police. Millbrook Police Department was small: a chief, 2 officers, and a dispatcher for a town of 8,400 people. Officer Tom Bradley responded to David's call. "Tom, I just had a teenage girl come in with a fraudulent prescription for Oxy, but I think there might be something bigger going on. She looked like she might be a trafficking victim." Tom Bradley had been on the force for 15 years. He took trafficking seriously, even though Millbrook seemed like an unlikely place for it. "What makes you think trafficking?" David described everything: the girl's appearance, behavior, injuries, the mention of a motel, her fear, the fake prescription. "Which motel?" She didn't say specifically, but there's only 3 motels in town. Millbrook had 2 small motels on the highway and 1 slightly larger one near the interstate exit. "I'll check them out. Can you describe the girl?" David provided a detailed description. Hispanic, approximately 16 years old, 5'3", very thin, long dark hair, wearing a short skirt and tank top despite cold weather. Officer Bradley knew the motels. The first 2 were family-owned, clean operations that catered to tourists and traveling salespeople. But the third, the roadside inn near the interstate, had always seemed slightly suspicious. The owner, Derek Walsh, kept to himself. The clientele seemed transient. There had been occasional disturbances reported, but nothing major enough to justify serious investigation. Bradley decided to check the roadside inn first. Meanwhile, David couldn't stop thinking about the girl. The look in her eyes haunted him. She was in danger. He was certain. She'd come for drugs she was probably forced to obtain. Now she'd return empty-handed to whoever had sent her. What would happen to her? David called Tom Bradley back. "Tom, I'm worried about that girl. If she went back to wherever without the drugs, whoever sent her might hurt her. We need to find her quickly. I'm heading to the roadside inn now. I'll call you after I check it out." Officer Bradley arrived at the roadside inn 20 minutes later. It was a rundown 2-story motel with exterior corridors, 30 rooms arranged in a U-shape around a parking lot. Several cars were parked outside rooms. The office had a flickering vacancy sign. Bradley walked into the office. Derek Walsh, the owner, was behind the desk, a man in his mid-40s with thinning hair and a practiced, friendly demeanor. "Afternoon, officer. Something I can help you with?" "I'm looking for a young Hispanic female, approximately 16, thin, might be staying here. Have you seen anyone matching that description?" Derek's expression remained neutral. "We get lots of guests. I don't pay much attention unless they cause problems. This would be a teenage girl, possibly accompanied by an adult male. She might look distressed or unwell. Haven't noticed anyone like that. But like I said, we mind our own business here. Guests value their privacy." Bradley's instincts told him Derek was lying, but he had no probable cause to search the premises. "If you do see anyone matching that description, please call the police department immediately. We have concerns for her well-being." "Sure thing, officer." Bradley left, frustrated. He called David with the update. The owner claims he hasn't seen anyone matching her description, but something felt off. "I think he was lying. So what now? Without probable cause, I can't search the motel. But I'm going to sit nearby and watch for a bit, see if I spot the girl or notice anything suspicious." David felt helpless. A girl in danger, possibly being held at a motel, and they couldn't do anything without more evidence. Then David had an idea. He called Bradley back. "Tom, what if she comes back to the pharmacy? What if whoever sent her tells her to try again, maybe with a different prescription, or to try a different approach?" "That's possible. If she does, call me immediately, and try to keep her there somehow without alerting whoever might be with her, or waiting for her." David agreed and spent the rest of the afternoon watching the door, hoping the girl would return while simultaneously dreading what her return would mean about her situation. At 4:47 p.m. the door chimed. The same girl walked in, this time wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, slightly more appropriate clothing but still looking terrified and exhausted. She approached the counter. "I'm sorry about earlier. I need to ask if you can fill this prescription." She slid a different prescription across the counter, this one supposedly from a Dr. Sarah Williams for hydrocodone. David looked at the prescription, then at the girl. "What's your name? Why do you need to know?" "Because I'm concerned about you. Are you okay? Are you safe?" The girl's eyes widened. For a moment she looked like she might speak, then fear crossed her face. "I'm fine. Can you fill the prescription or not?" David made a subtle gesture toward his pharmacy technician, who immediately went to the back and called Officer Bradley, as they'd prearranged. "I need to verify this prescription too. It'll take a few minutes. Would you like to sit down? I need to hurry. I can't stay long." "Where do you need to get back to?" The girl didn't answer. She looked toward the door nervously, as if expecting someone to walk in, or watching to see if she took too long. David tried a different approach. "Are you being hurt? Are you in trouble? I can help you if you need help." The girl's facade cracked. Tears filled her eyes. "I can't. He'll kill me if I say anything. Please just give me the pills so I can go." "Who will kill you?" Before she could answer, a man walked into the pharmacy. Mid-40s, average build, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. He looked around casually, spotted the girl, and approached. "There you are. What's taking so long?" His tone was friendly, but with an edge of threat. The girl's entire demeanor changed. The pharmacist is checking on the prescription. It'll just be a few more minutes. The man looked at David with an assessing gaze. David met his eyes, trying to remain professional and calm. I'm verifying the prescription with the prescribing physician. Standard procedure for controlled substances. How long will that take? 10 to 15 minutes. That's fine. We'll wait. The man put his hand on the girl's shoulder, not roughly, but possessively. She tensed at his touch. They sat in the waiting area. David pretended to make phone calls while actually stalling for time, praying Officer Bradley would arrive quickly. The man kept glancing at his phone, then at the door, then at David. He was suspicious, alert. After 5 minutes he stood. You know what? We'll come back later. Let's go. The girl stood obediently. As they walked toward the door, she glanced back at David. Her eyes said everything. Please help me. I can't leave. Save me. David made a split-second decision. Sir, I actually just got confirmation from the doctor. I can fill the prescription now if you'd like to wait just 5 more minutes. The man hesitated, weighing options. The girl looked terrified that he might refuse and take her away before help arrived. Fine. 5 minutes. They sat back down. David went through the motions of filling the fake prescription, taking tablets from stock bottles, counting them into a prescription bottle, printing a label. He moved as slowly as possible without being obviously suspicious. 6 minutes later, Officer Bradley walked into the pharmacy, followed by his partner Officer Jane Morrison. They'd been parked nearby waiting for David's signal. The man with the girl immediately stood, assessing the situation. We need to go, now. Sir, I need to ask you some questions, Officer Bradley said, approaching calmly but with authority. About what? We haven't done anything. That young woman brought in a fraudulent prescription earlier today. I need to speak with both of you about it. We don't know anything about that. We're leaving. Sir, please stay where you are. Miss, what's your name? The girl looked at the man, then at the officer, terrified to speak. Jasmine. Jasmine, how old are you? 18. An obvious lie. She looked 16 at most. Can I see your ID? She didn't have one. Sir, what's your relationship to Jasmine? She's my girlfriend. This is none of your business. If she's 18, she should have ID. If she doesn't, I'm concerned she might be a minor. I need to verify her age and identity. The man's calm demeanor was cracking. We're leaving. You can't hold us without cause. I have cause to detain you both for questioning regarding prescription fraud. And I have concerns that this young woman might be endangered. You're both coming to the station. The man looked at the exits, calculating. For a moment, David thought he might run or become violent, but Officer Morrison had positioned herself blocking the door, hand near her weapon. The man realized he was trapped. Fine, but I'm calling my lawyer. At the police station, they separated Jasmine from the man, whose name was Derek Walsh, the owner of the roadside inn. In an interview room with Officer Bradley and a female victim advocate from the county, Jasmine slowly began to tell her story. She was 16, not 18. She'd run away from home in Los Angeles 8 months ago, after years of family problems. She'd been living on the streets when Derek found her. He'd seemed kind at first, offering her food and a place to stay at his motel. He said she could work cleaning rooms to earn her keep, but within days, Derek's kindness had turned sinister. He'd given her drugs, first marijuana, then pills, then stronger substances. He'd told her she owed him for the food, shelter, and drugs. He said she needed to work off her debt by entertaining men he brought to the motel. For 8 months, Jasmine had been trapped. Derek controlled everything, her food, her clothing, her movements. He kept her drugged and compliant. He brought men to her room, sometimes multiple men per day. He kept all the money. When Jasmine tried to resist or escape, Derek beat her and threatened to kill her. He said if I ever ran or told anyone, he'd find me and kill me, Jasmine said, crying. He said he had connections everywhere. He said no one would believe me anyway because I'm just a runaway drug addict prostitute. Those were his words. The prescriptions had been Derek's idea. He'd obtained stolen prescription information and had been sending Jasmine to different pharmacies in surrounding towns to obtain painkillers, sometimes to keep her sedated, sometimes to sell for profit. Usually Pharmacist would fill the prescriptions without question, especially in small towns where controlled substance fraud was less common. But you wouldn't fill it, Jasmine said to David, who'd been allowed to give his statement. You asked questions. You looked at me like you were concerned. No one had looked at me like that in so long. I wanted to tell you, but I was so scared Derek would know and hurt me. When he came into the pharmacy, was that planned? David asked. No, I was supposed to go alone, but I'd been gone longer than he expected. He got suspicious and came looking for me. When he saw I was still there, he realized something might be wrong. That's why he tried to leave quickly. But then you said you could fill the prescription, and he thought maybe it was okay. He wanted those pills. Officer Bradley called the FBI. Prescription fraud crossing state lines, plus suspicion of human trafficking meant federal jurisdiction. Within hours, FBI agents from Portland arrived, including Special Agent Lisa Chen from the Human Trafficking Task Force. Agent Chen had investigated dozens of trafficking cases. Jasmine's story fit a common pattern. Vulnerable runaway targeted by trafficker, controlled through drugs and violence, forced into commercial sex, unable to escape
due to fear and manipulation. Derek Walsh has likely done this before, Chen told the Millbrook police. Traffickers rarely have just one victim. We need to search that motel thoroughly. With a federal search warrant, FBI agents descended on the roadside inn that evening. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The roadside inn had 30 rooms. Most appeared to be legitimate, occupied by travelers passing through or workers in town temporarily. But 5 rooms told a different story. Room 14 was where Jasmine had been kept. The room was sparse, with signs of long-term occupation, but few personal belongings. Agents found drugs, used needles, restraints, and a notebook where Derek had tracked appointments, men who'd paid to rape Jasmine, with dates, times, and amounts paid. Room 18 held another victim, a 17-year-old named Maria, who'd been trafficked by Derek for 6 months. She was found unconscious from a drug overdose. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital where she was stabilized. Room 22 held evidence of a third victim who'd apparently been there recently but wasn't currently present. Agents launched a search for her. Derek's office contained extensive records, fake prescriptions from multiple stolen physician identities, financial records showing thousands of dollars in profits from both commercial sex and prescription drug fraud, communications with other traffickers in a network, and disturbing photographs of victims. This wasn't just one man trafficking 2 girls. Agent Chen explained to Officer Bradley. This is part of a larger network. Derek Walsh has connections to traffickers in other cities. He's been doing this for years, possibly with dozens of victims over time. Derek Walsh in custody initially denied everything, but faced with overwhelming evidence, he eventually admitted to trafficking Jasmine and Maria. He refused to provide information about the network or other victims, insisting he worked alone, an obvious lie given the evidence. Derek was charged with federal human trafficking offenses, including sex trafficking of minors, drug trafficking, prescription fraud, kidnapping, and assault. He faced decades in prison. Maria, the 17-year-old found overdosing, survived but had a long recovery ahead. She'd been trafficked for 6 months and was severely traumatized. Like Jasmine, she'd been a runaway who Derek had targeted and exploited. The third victim, eventually identified as 16-year-old Carmen, was located in Sacramento. She'd been moved to another trafficker in Derek's network. Her rescue led to additional arrests and the discovery of more victims. David Martinez, the pharmacist whose suspicion had started the entire investigation, was shaken by what his simple verification call had uncovered. "I just thought it was prescription fraud," he told Agent Chen. "I didn't realize there was this whole operation." "Most people wouldn't have noticed anything at all," Chen replied. "They would have filled the prescription without question, or at most refused it, and sent the girl away. You noticed concerning signs, you trusted your instincts, and you reported your suspicions. That started an investigation that rescued multiple victims and dismantled a trafficking operation. You should be proud." But David didn't feel proud. He felt horror at what had been happening in his small town. How did no one notice? How was this operating for months or years without anyone seeing? "Traffickers are skilled at hiding," Chen explained. "They operate in plain sight but in ways that don't attract attention. They use legitimate businesses like motels. They keep victims isolated and controlled. They choose victims society tends to ignore: runaways, addicts, marginalized youth. And they rely on people not asking questions, not getting involved, not reporting concerns. You broke that pattern. You asked questions. You got involved. That's rare and it's heroic." Jasmine Rodriguez spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from malnutrition, untreated infections, and withdrawal from the drugs Derek had kept her dependent on. FBI victim specialists worked with her throughout, explaining her rights, the investigation, and the resources available to help her recover. "I don't have anywhere to go," Jasmine told Agent Chen. "I can't go back to my family. That's why I ran away in the first place." "We're not sending you back to an unsafe situation," Chen assured her. "We're placing you in a specialized program for trafficking survivors. You'll have housing, therapy, education support, and help rebuilding your life." Jasmine was placed in a secure residential program for commercially sexually exploited youth. The program provided trauma therapy, education, life skills training, and support in a safe environment with other survivors. "The recovery process will be long," her therapist, Dr. Susan Martinez, told her. "You experience prolonged trauma, kidnapping, sexual assault, physical abuse, drug addiction, captivity. Those experiences change your brain and how you see the world. Healing takes time, but it's possible." Jasmine struggled initially. She had nightmares. She couldn't trust adults. She flinched at sudden movements. She felt shame about what had happened and what she'd been forced to do. She experienced cravings for the drugs Derek had given her. She isolated herself from other residents. But slowly, with consistent therapy and support, Jasmine began to heal. She started participating in group activities. She began her education. She dropped out of school before running away and needed to catch up. She formed tentative friendships with other survivors who understood what she'd experienced. "I'm starting to remember who I was before Derek," Jasmine told Dr. Martinez. 6 months into treatment, "I'd forgotten. For so long I was just what he made me. Property, an object, nothing. But I'm remembering I'm a person. I have thoughts and feelings and dreams. I want things. I can make choices. That sounds simple, but it's huge for me. Maria, the other victim found at the motel, had a similar journey. Her physical recovery from the overdose was relatively quick, but psychological healing took much longer. She was placed in the same program as Jasmine, and the two formed a bond, shared understanding between survivors. David Martinez struggled with his own reactions to what he'd uncovered. He couldn't stop thinking about Jasmine, that terrified 16-year-old who'd walked into his pharmacy twice, silently begging for help with her eyes. He thought about how close he'd come to simply refusing the prescription and sending her away. What would have happened to her if he had? "I almost didn't call the police," David told his wife Elena one evening. "I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just prescription fraud. Maybe the girl was just a drug user trying to get pills. I almost talked myself out of getting involved." "But you didn't," Elena reminded him. "You trusted your instincts. You called. You saved her." David sought counseling to process what he'd witnessed and his role in the rescue. His therapist helped him understand that what he was experiencing, intrusive thoughts about Jasmine, hypervigilance at work, difficulty sleeping, was a normal response to being involved in a traumatic situation. "You're not just a passive observer of this story," his therapist explained. "You were a key actor. You made decisions that had life and death consequences. That's a heavy thing to carry. Processing it is important." David also made changes at his pharmacy. He implemented enhanced training for his staff on recognizing trafficking victims. He put up posters in the bathroom with National Human Trafficking Hotline information. He became more vigilant about suspicious prescriptions and concerning presentations. "I won't miss another one," David told his pharmacy technicians. "If someone comes in and something seems wrong, trust that feeling and let me know. We're not just filling prescriptions, we're looking out for people."
Derek Walsh's trial began 14 months after his arrest. The federal prosecutors had built an overwhelming case against him, and Derek's attorneys advised him to accept a plea deal rather than go to trial. But Derek refused, apparently believing he could manipulate a jury the way he'd manipulated his victims. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented evidence of Derek's trafficking operation, crowned Derek's testimony from Jasmine and Maria describing months of captivity, rape, and abuse, medical evidence of injuries, malnutrition, and drug addiction, financial records showing Derek's profits from commercial sex, communications with other traffickers, Derek's notebook tracking appointments with victims, testimony from some of the men who'd paid Derek to rape the girls, David Martinez's testimony about the fake prescriptions and Jasmine's demeanor. The defense tried to paint Jasmine and Maria as willing participants who'd chosen sex work and were now falsely claiming trafficking to avoid legal consequences. They tried to suggest the girls were lying for sympathy or financial gain, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jasmine and Maria had both been minors, legally unable to consent to commercial sex even if they'd wanted to, which they clearly hadn't. The medical evidence showed prolonged abuse. Derek's own records documented his systematic exploitation. Multiple witnesses corroborated the prosecutor's case. Jasmine testified despite her terror. She described Derek finding her when she was homeless and vulnerable, his initial kindness that turned to control, the first time he forced her to have sex with a stranger for money, the beatings when she resisted, the drugs he used to keep her compliant, the threats he made, the 8 months of captivity and repeated rape. "He told me I was worthless," Jasmine said, crying but maintaining composure. "He said no one would care about me. He said I deserved what was happening because I'd run away from home. He said I owed him and I'd work off my debt by letting men use my body. I was 16 years old, I was a child, and he sold me to men who raped me." The defense attorney's cross-examination tried to undermine Jasmine's credibility, suggesting she'd chosen to stay, that she could have left, that she was lying about being forced. "Why didn't you just leave if it was so terrible?" the attorney asked. Jasmine looked at him with haunted eyes. "Because he said he'd kill me if I tried. Because he controlled everything. My food, my clothes, whether I ate or starved. Because he kept me drugged. Because I didn't know where I was or how to get help. Because he destroyed my sense of self until I believed I was what he said I was. Worthless, property, nothing. That's what trafficking is. It's not just physical chains, it's psychological control that makes escape seem impossible." The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Derek Walsh showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. At sentencing, Jasmine provided a victim impact statement. "Derek Walsh stole 8 months of my life. He raped me and sold me to be raped by others. He beat me, drugged me, and tried to destroy who I was as a person. But he didn't succeed. I survived. I'm healing. I'm getting my life back. I want him to know that he didn't win. I'm stronger than he thought, and I'm going to build a good life, not despite what he did to me, but because surviving what he did proved how strong I am." Derek Walsh was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Judge Patricia Morrison addressed Derek directly. "You targeted vulnerable children and systematically exploited them for profit. You stole their freedom, their dignity, their their innocence. You traumatize them in ways that will affect them for the rest of their lives. You are a predator who deserves every day of the 30 years you'll spend in prison. 2 years after David Martinez had noticed something wrong about a prescription, he found himself standing in front of the Oregon Board of Pharmacy, presenting a proposal for mandatory human trafficking awareness training for all licensed pharmacists. Pharmacies are uniquely positioned to identify trafficking victims, David explained to the board. Traffickers often use fake prescriptions to obtain drugs for victims or to sell for profit. Victims may be sent to pharmacies alone, giving them brief moments away from traffickers. If pharmacists are trained to recognize warning signs and know how to respond, we can identify victims and get them help. David had partnered with FBI agent Lisa Chen and several anti-trafficking organizations to develop comprehensive training for pharmacists covering what human trafficking is and how it operates, common signs that someone might be a trafficking victim, how traffickers use pharmacies, fake prescriptions, purchasing supplies, sending victims for emergency contraception, what to do if you suspect someone is being trafficked, resources for victims, legal obligations and protections for pharmacists who report. The Oregon Board of Pharmacy approved the training as a continuing education requirement. Within a year, every licensed pharmacist in Oregon had completed it. We're creating a network of aware observers, Agent Chen told a conference of pharmacists. You see thousands of people, most are regular customers getting legitimate medications, but occasionally, someone will come in who's in trouble. If you're trained to notice and respond, you might save a life like David saved Jasmine's. The training expanded beyond Oregon. Other states began implementing similar requirements. Major pharmacy chains made the training mandatory for their staff nationwide. Within 3 years, over 100,000 pharmacists had completed human trafficking awareness training based on David's initial proposal. The training led to tangible results. Pharmacists across the country began identifying and reporting potential trafficking situations. A pharmacist in Texas noticed a young woman trying to fill prescriptions from multiple doctors and, through gentle questions, learned she was being forced to obtain pills for her trafficker. The pharmacist called police, leading to the woman's rescue. A pharmacy technician in Florida recognized signs of trafficking in a teenage boy who came in repeatedly for emergency contraception and reported concerns that led to an investigation. A pharmacist in Michigan noticed a woman buying large quantities of condoms and personal lubricant while appearing distressed and called the trafficking hotline, resulting in an intervention. Each case represented a life potentially saved because a pharmacist had been trained to notice and act. Jasmine Rodriguez, now 19 and in college studying psychology, became involved in the advocacy work. She partnered with David and Agent Chen to share her story at training sessions. I walked into David's pharmacy twice, Jasmine told an audience of 300 pharmacists at a conference. The first time, I couldn't bring myself to ask for help even though I desperately wanted to. The second time, my trafficker came with me and I couldn't say anything. But David noticed anyway. He saw that something was wrong. He didn't ignore it or convince himself it wasn't his business. He called police. That call saved my life. She described what it had been like to be trafficked, the fear, the helplessness, the desperate hope that someone would notice. When you're being trafficked, you're isolated. Your trafficker controls everything. But sometimes there are these brief moments, being sent to a store, going to a pharmacy, being in public, where you hope someone will see through the facade. You hope someone will notice you're in trouble. Most people don't notice, or they notice but don't want to get involved. David noticed and acted. That's what saved me. Her testimony was powerful. Pharmacists saw not just statistics about trafficking, but a real person, articulate, intelligent, pursuing education, who had been enslaved and would have remained trapped or died if someone hadn't paid attention. When Jasmine speaks, you can see it transform people's thinking, David observed. They stop seeing trafficking as something that happens elsewhere to other people. They realize it happens in their communities, their pharmacies, right in front of them, and they realize they have power to help. The investigation that began with Jasmine's rescue had uncovered a trafficking network spanning multiple states. Derek Walsh had been one operator in a larger system. FBI investigations led to 17 additional arrests of traffickers, pimps, and facilitators over 3 years. The network had been sophisticated, using legitimate businesses like motels and truck stops as fronts, moving victims between locations to avoid detection, recruiting vulnerable youth through social media and street outreach, using drugs and violence to maintain control, and generating millions of dollars in profits. Derek Walsh's arrest was the thread that unraveled the whole operation, Agent Chen explained at a press conference. His records led us to other traffickers. Those investigations led to more traffickers. Each arrest provided information that expanded our understanding of the network. We've now dismantled a significant trafficking operation and rescued 43 victims. Those 43 victims, ranging in age from 14 to 23, both girls and boys from various backgrounds, were all placed in specialized recovery programs. Their healing journeys varied.
Some progressed quickly, others struggled with ongoing trauma, addiction, and mental health challenges. A few ran away from programs and returned to dangerous situations, but most were slowly rebuilding their lives with proper support. Trafficking survivors need comprehensive long-term services, said Dr. Rachel Foster, who directed one of the recovery programs. They need safe housing, trauma therapy, medical care, substance abuse treatment, education, job training, and ongoing support. Recovery isn't quick or linear. Many survivors struggle for years, but with proper resources, most can heal and build meaningful lives. The investigation also led to prosecution of some of the men who'd paid to rape the victims. Under federal law, purchasing commercial sex with a minor was a serious crime. Investigators identified dozens of men from Derek's records and other traffickers' documentation. Some men claimed they hadn't known the victims were minors or being trafficked, but prosecutors argued that the victims' youth and distressed appearance should have been obvious, and that purchasing any commercial sex contributed to demand that fueled trafficking. 23 men were ultimately charged and convicted for their roles. Their sentences ranged from probation to 10 years in prison, depending on the severity and frequency of their offenses. We need to address both supply and demand, Agent Chen told legislators. Trafficking exists because there's demand for commercial sex, including with minors. We need to prosecute not just traffickers but also buyers who create the market. Every man who paid Derek Walsh to rape Jasmine contributed to her captivity. They deserve consequences. 5 years after David noticed something wrong about a prescription, the ripples from that observation had created measurable systemic changes in how Oregon and other states addressed human trafficking. Oregon had implemented comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation including mandatory training for healthcare providers, pharmacists, hotel/motel staff, and other professionals likely to encounter victims, increased penalties for trafficking and purchasing commercial sex with minors, enhanced victim services and long-term support funding, safe harbor laws protecting minor trafficking victims from prosecution for prostitution, requirements for businesses like hotels to post trafficking hotline information. Similar legislation had passed in 12 other states, often directly citing Jasmine's case and David's intervention as catalysts. Jasmine's rescue demonstrated that ordinary citizens in their regular jobs can identify trafficking if they're trained and willing to act, said State Senator Maria Santos, who'd sponsored Oregon's legislation. David Martinez was a pharmacist doing his job. He noticed concerning signs, trusted his instincts, and reported. That led to multiple victims being rescued and a trafficking network being dismantled. We need more David Martinez's, more people willing to notice and act. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacy recommended human trafficking awareness training as continuing education for pharmacists nationwide. Major pharmacy chains, CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, implemented mandatory training for all pharmacy staff. Pharmacies see millions of customers annually, said Dr. Thomas Anderson, CEO of a major pharmacy chain. If even a small fraction of those customers are trafficking victims, and our pharmacists can identify them, we have enormous potential to disrupt trafficking operations and save lives. This training is an investment in both public safety and our responsibility as healthcare providers. The training led to hundreds of reported potential trafficking situations over 5 years. Not all reports resulted in confirmed trafficking cases. Some were misunderstandings or other issues. But the increased vigilance meant fewer victims slipped through unnoticed. Hotels and motels, particularly those along highways and in areas known for trafficking, also implemented training and protocols. Staff learned to recognize signs like GARS, Bisham dots, Kohr export polio of weights, young people with older controllers who speak for them, signs of confinement or distress, high volumes of male visitors to specific rooms. The roadside inn, where Jasmine was held, is now permanently closed, Officer Tom Bradley told a community meeting. But the lessons from that case have transformed how motels in our area operate. Owners and staff are trained to notice and report suspicious activity. We've created a partnership where businesses help us identify trafficking rather than unknowingly facilitating it. Beyond their advocacy work, David, Jasmine, and others involved in the case had built lives that provided normalcy and healing. David, now 43, continued running Millbrook Pharmacy. He'd hired additional staff, including a pharmacy technician who was herself a trafficking survivor and brought unique awareness to the work. His pharmacy had become known regionally as a safe place where people in crisis would be noticed and helped. We've had several situations over the years where someone came in, not always for fake prescriptions, sometimes just looking distressed or asking subtle questions, and we've been able to connect them with help, David told a journalist writing about the 5-year anniversary of Jasmine's rescue. Not every case involves trafficking. Sometimes it's domestic violence or homelessness or mental health crisis. But we've created a culture where we pay attention to people and we help when we can. David's wife Elena had become involved in local anti-trafficking efforts, serving on the board of a non-profit providing services to survivors. Their two children, now teenagers, had grown up hearing the story of how their father had saved Jasmine and had internalized values of awareness and intervention. "My kids don't see anything unusual about paying attention to people who might need help," David said. "It's just normal in our family to notice when something seems wrong and to do something about it. I hope that's a value they carry throughout their lives." Jasmine Rodriguez, now 21, was thriving in ways she never thought possible during her months of captivity. She was in her senior year of college, studying psychology and social work. She'd maintained sobriety for over 4 years. She had a close circle of friends, a supportive relationship with a boyfriend who understood her history, and ambitious career plans. "I want to work with trafficking survivors," Jasmine told her academic advisor. "I want to provide the kind of therapy and support I received. I understand what survivors experience in ways someone who hasn't lived it can't. I want to use my experience to help others heal." Jasmine had reconnected with her family, cautiously and with boundaries. The family issues that had led her to run away at 15 had been addressed through therapy. While relationships remained complicated, Jasmine now had contact with her mother and siblings. They celebrated holidays together, though Jasmine maintained her independence. "I needed to heal individually before I could engage with my family," Jasmine explained. "Early in recovery, I was so focused on processing the trafficking trauma that I couldn't also deal with family trauma. But now I'm ready. We're building new relationships based on where we all are now, not where we were when I left." She'd also maintained a relationship with David Martinez, the pharmacist who'd saved her. They met quarterly for coffee, a tradition that had started in the early days of her recovery when she'd wanted to thank him and had evolved into genuine friendship. "David represents hope to me," Jasmine told her therapist. "He's proof that there are good people who notice suffering and act to help. When I'm struggling with trust issues or cynicism about humanity, I remember David. I remember that he saw me when I felt invisible. That keeps me grounded." Maria, the other victim rescued from the roadside inn, had a harder recovery journey. She'd struggled with addiction more severely than Jasmine and had several relapses before achieving sustained sobriety. She'd aged out of the youth program and was now living in transitional housing for young adults, working part-time at a restaurant while completing her GED. "Maria's still fighting," her case manager told a team meeting. "She's had setbacks, but she keeps trying. She keeps showing up to therapy and recovery meetings. That's resilience. That's success even when it doesn't look perfect." FBI agent Lisa Chen, now 47, had continued specializing in human trafficking cases. The Jasmine case had been one of her most significant, not the largest in terms of victim numbers, but impactful because of how it demonstrated the power of community awareness and intervention. "Most of my cases start with law enforcement investigation," Chen told trainees at the FBI Academy. "But the best cases, the ones that rescue victims before severe harm, often start with observant citizens. A pharmacist, a hotel worker, a teacher, a neighbor. Someone notices something wrong and reports it. We need more of that. We need communities where people are trained to notice trafficking indicators and empowered to report concerns." 10 years after David noticed Jasmine's fake prescription, he reflected on both progress and ongoing challenges in combating human trafficking. "We've made significant strides," David told an interviewer. "More people are aware trafficking exists. More professionals are trained to recognize it. More victims are being identified and rescued. But trafficking continues. New victims are being exploited right now. We can't become complacent." The challenges were substantial. Trafficking had increasingly moved online, with recruiters using social media to target vulnerable youth. The COVID-19 pandemic had isolated vulnerable people and disrupted services for survivors. Demand for commercial sex continued, creating markets for trafficking. Many trafficking operations remained hidden and undetected. Survivors often faced long-term struggles with trauma, addiction, and rebuilding lives. Resources for victim services remained inadequate relative to need. "For every Jasmine who gets rescued and receives comprehensive support, there are victims who never get identified or who don't have access to quality services," said Dr. Foster, who now directed a national trafficking survivors program. "We've built some excellent programs, but they're underfunded and serve only a fraction of survivors who need help. We need sustained commitment and resources to address this problem adequately." David and Jasmine continued their advocacy work, now focusing on emerging challenges. They worked on initiatives addressing online trafficking, supporting legislation for enhanced victim services funding, and developing programs helping survivors with long-term recovery needs like education and employment. "The initial rescue is just the beginning," Jasmine told policymakers. "I was rescued 10 years ago. I still deal with trauma responses. I still have triggers and difficult days. I needed 10 years of therapy, support, education, and stability to get where I am now. Most survivors don't have access to 10 years of comprehensive services. We need to change that." They also worked on prevention, addressing root causes that made youth vulnerable to trafficking. "I was vulnerable because I'd run away from family problems," Jasmine explained. "Other youth are vulnerable because of poverty, abuse, foster care instability, LGBTQ rejection, homelessness, addiction. We need to address those underlying vulnerabilities. We need to ensure youth have safe homes, supportive families, access to mental health care, educational opportunities. Prevention means creating conditions where youth don't become vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. On the 10th anniversary of Jasmine's rescue, David's Pharmacy hosted a community event honoring survivors and celebrating progress in anti-trafficking work. Jasmine, now 26 and working as a licensed therapist, specializing in trauma survivors, was the keynote speaker. 10 years ago today, I walked into this pharmacy for the second time, Jasmine began, gesturing to the familiar space. I was 16, being trafficked, desperate for help, but unable to ask for it directly. I handed David a fake prescription, hoping he would somehow see through it to the truth of my situation. And he did. He noticed something was wrong. He called police. That decision changed everything. She described the decade since, the rescue, the painful early recovery, the education, the therapy, the slow rebuilding of her life. I'm 26 now. I have a master's degree in clinical social work. I work with trafficking survivors, helping them heal the way I was helped. I have a good life, relationships, career, hope for the future. I have things I never thought I'd have when I was being trafficked. That's because David noticed and acted. Jasmine introduced several other survivors, whose rescues had been connected to the awareness training David had helped create. Each told their story of being noticed, a pharmacist recognizing signs, a hotel worker reporting concerns, a doctor asking the right questions. Each credited trained professionals for seeing them and getting them help. This is what systemic change looks like, Jasmine said. Not just one person being saved, but networks of aware observers who identify victims and connect them with help. Over 10 years, thousands of professionals have been trained. Hundreds of victims have been identified. Lives have been saved. That's impact. David spoke after Jasmine, characteristically modest about his role. 10 years ago, I noticed something wrong about a prescription and a teenage girl's behavior. I called police. That's all I did. But Jasmine, she survived trafficking, fought through trauma, built an amazing life, and now helps others do the same. She's the real hero of this story. He looked at the audience of community members, survivors, advocates, and professionals. What I want everyone to understand is that noticing and reporting doesn't require special skills or authority. I'm a pharmacist, not law enforcement or a social worker, but I'd received training on trafficking indicators. When I saw red flags, I trusted what I'd learned and reported my concerns. That's something anyone can do. Pay attention. Trust your instincts when something seems wrong. Report concerns to authorities. You might save a life. Agent Chen, now in her 50s and leading the FBI's human trafficking program nationally, spoke about the investigation that had grown from David's initial report. That one phone call about a fake prescription led to dismantling a trafficking network, rescuing 43 victims, and prosecuting dozens of traffickers and buyers. It demonstrated that ordinary citizens in their regular jobs can be powerful allies in fighting trafficking. David's observations started everything. Jasmine's courage in surviving and telling her story sustained it. Together, they've created a model for community-based trafficking prevention that's been replicated nationwide. The event concluded with a moment of silence for trafficking victims who hadn't been rescued, who died in captivity, or from trauma aftermath, whose stories hadn't ended with recovery. We celebrate survivors like Jasmine, the organizer said, but we remember that for every survivor story, there are tragedies. People who were never identified, never rescued, never given a chance to heal. That's why this work continues. That's why we keep training people to notice, keep improving services for survivors, keep fighting for systemic change.
15 years after David Martinez noticed something wrong about a prescription and trusted his instincts, he stood in his pharmacy, the same space where everything had begun, reflecting on how one observation had spiraled into impact he never could have imagined. The pharmacy looked largely the same layout, same counter where Jasmine had slid that fake prescription, but subtle changes reflected the journey. Posters about trafficking awareness, information about the hotline number, staff who'd all completed extensive training on recognizing exploitation. Sometimes I stand here and think about that day, David told a documentary filmmaker creating a piece about community-based trafficking prevention. I think about how close I came to handling it differently. What if I'd just refused the prescription and sent her away? What if I'd filled it without questioning? What if I'd noticed something was wrong but convinced myself not to get involved? Jasmine might still be trapped, or dead. Those what-ifs humble me. Jasmine Rodriguez, now 31, had built an impressive career as a therapist and advocate. She directed a treatment program for trafficking survivors, providing the comprehensive long-term support she'd once received. She'd written a book about her experience in recovery.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.